Hola, mi gente. Third episode in English, but I'm trying to get better. Um, my French is still getting in the way of my English, so I apologize. I'm gonna try to articulate more, to speak slowly, and to make better episode because I think that um the story that I'm trying to tell matters. So, guys, be patient. So, in this episode, Miente, which is the 1st of March, and March is a month that means a lot to me because this year is going to be the 5th anniversary of my dad. But in this episode, Miente, I wanted to talk to you about how it felt to come to America as somebody who was born in Cameroon, even coming from um, what people in America would call a wealthy family, even though my dad, as I said, had many wives. Yeah. So I came to America in 1993. And the first time I realized that I was Black was when I came to America. Um, I think the first question you're going to ask is, didn't you go to France before? You didn't go to Europe before you came to America? The answer is yes. But it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. Maybe I didn't see it. Maybe I was too young to see it. But at that time, when you were going to Europe, in my case, it was mostly France and most of the time Paris. It was different, but I think that you were looked as an African. Knew that you were different, but you knew that it had something to do um, with where you came from. Um, when I was a child, I spent a lot of time in French hospitals. And I remember when we were supposed to do like theater and something like that, for me too, it was very, very different. And I had trouble with my hair, for example, was going to braid my hair. That time, I was way, way, way too young to relax my hair. At that time it was the 80s. You didn't relax kids' hair, and especially Black kids' hair in France. You didn't do that. So I had stuff like that going on. But I don't think I ever felt Black. I think I felt like a stranger. But I think that with time, um, I stopped seeing it, but it may have been because my disability was taking all that space and that I couldn't see it. It may have been that. As I said before, as I explained before, I my right leg was way shorter than my left leg, and doctors and hospitals in France, in Paris, most of the time are trying to find a solution because my the disease that caused my disability. Um, when I caught it, I was 1 month old. It's called meliorastosis. So in France, in those years, disability took everything, and I knew that I was different, and I think I guessed that even when people were looking at me differently, I felt like it was because of my leg. I felt like it was because of my ability. So when I came to America, it was the first time that Blackness, that race, basically was thrown in my face. It was the first time that really people were made me feel that it was supposed to mean something, that it was supposed to define me, that it was supposed to tell everything about me. First, there was the expectation that because I was an African American, it meant that I was a scholarship kid. I wasn't. Second, there was expectation that I was supposed to be poor. I wasn't. Third, there was the expectation that I was supposed to come from to have certain type of values. I remember one of the dean of students, a great guy, you know, um, told he had this very very um, romanticized view of Africa because he was an African American who was very proud. It was the, Black is beautiful moment where, African Americans were doing everything that they could to look at Africa differently. Yeah. So I came to America at that time. So yeah, there was that thing where people, I was an alien. I was Black, disabled, African, and it meant something to everybody except me because I think that with all of those traits, let's call them that, I felt that I was just me. And I felt that I couldn't allow those traits to define me. And I felt that I didn't want that. I didn't want people to, um, when they meet me, to tell me where are you from because of my accent that I haven't lost. I felt that it was always very, very strange when people were looking at me and were saying, "Oh, where are you from?" If you said Cameroon, then you had to explain to them where Cameroon was and to basically tell them everything about Cameroon and to tell them everything about Africa, which you didn't know. Because again, the only African country where I've really, really been to is Cameroon. And even Cameroon, I left Cameroon in 1993. And I can't even say that I know Cameroon because there are most parts of Cameroon I haven't been to, except for, Yaoundé, the capital, and except for my dad's village where I've been to maybe 10 times during my whole life. I haven't been really to Cameroon. So people, since I left Cameroon, have been expecting me to tell them about Cameroon. You know, to basically tell you another story. In 2019, when I had my third surgery, the social worker from the Brussels Bar Association were in this deli, let's call it, and they were selling dates. And then she looks at those things and she said, "Oh, that must remind you of Cameroon." And I look at her and I'm just like, "Wow, no, it doesn't." And I keeps and I say to her, "I haven't been to Cameroons in over 30 years, and yet you are assuming that I don't know. That fact is the most important thing about me." So that isn't an American story, that's a Belgian story. I have to make this point. It's very, very different. Um, the way you feel your Africanness in Europe. Well, I wouldn't, I have to be precise. It's even very, very different the way you feel your Africanness in France, than in Belgium, than in Spain. And of course, it's very, very different in America. Americans are more open to a lot of stuff. They may be, and this is I'm, you know, I'm generalizing and overgeneralization. So it's just my experience, okay? Americans are much more, when they are educated, they're much more aware of the fact that they don't know much. They may be willing to make assumptions, but at least they're open um, with the African experience. In Europe, there's a lot more stereotypes. And I think people are more closed, no matter where they are. And I think that sometimes they have been to African countries, but yet they still feel this sense of it's an exotic place. All blacks are the same and are poor. They come to France or Belgium to be able to take advantage of the welfare state. So a lot of stereotypes. In America, at least in the 90s and the 2000s, there were some of that, but yet um, it was more open. American society used to be, maybe changing with everything that's happening now. But when I came to America, it was more open. People were more welcoming, even though it was still a problem. Because, as in all cases, when you don't know, you don't know. And when you're willing to make assumptions about somebody based on race and where they come from, that's where it leads you to. So, what I would have said back then, I would have said, I'm not from Wakanda, you know. And I think that my problem with the Wakanda thing was that they made it up. And I think that there are so many good things to say about Africa. There are African, there are African stories that needs to be told without um without imagining it to say about the past, about even what's happening today. I think that my dad's story, Victor Fotso shows that, is that in the case of Africa and Africans, usually what they're living um, doesn't really interest anybody. People need to make it up. People want it to be meaningful. People want it to be relatable. The other gaze, when it comes to Africa, to Africans, to people from Cameroon or anywhere else in Africa, it's almost predominant. You can't escape it. It's the other that defines you. It's the other that tells you whether you can be a lawyer or not. It's the other that tells you whether you're disabled enough or not. It's the able that tells you whether you're not uppity. It's the other gaze that tells you who you are. You may go to law school. You may have gone to law school like I have. You may have been to an American school, like to American schools like I have. But despite the fact that I left Cameroon in 1993, when I left New York to go to Belgium, the Belgian never wanted to see me as an American. They always needed to see me as an African. And that made it possible for them to act a certain way to feel superior. Because to Americans, they feel inferior. So that there's that complexity that I'm not really explaining very, very well. When President Trump made that statement about shithole countries, and I think he said out loud, as he has done many times, what many people, not just in America, feel. And why does what they feel matter? Why is it important what they feel? Because it defines the reality, what is possible, the norm for so many people like me, whether or not we are still living in Africa or not. When people feel like you come from a shithole country, you're very, very limited in where you can go. You can try to break the door, break the ceiling, you know, basically say, yes, I can. But it's very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult. No matter what your abilities are, no matter what your background is, no matter what your education is, it's very, very difficult because you're not expected. That was my experience in the Brussels Bar Association, where at some point there were some question as to whether or not I was really an American lawyer because of the sole fact that I come from Cameroon. So yes, that Africanness is a heavy, heavy. I'm not going to say burden, but it's something that you have to learn to define for yourself without being ashamed of it, to be able to fly. Otherwise, you're just going to be crushed by it. Otherwise, you're just going to be crushed by it. So, yes, do I come from a shithole country? Why haven't I decided to return to Cameroon? For at least two reasons. The first one is that disability matters. The second one is that where you study, where you grow, where you tie yourself, where you learn to stand up for yourself matter. I believe in adoption. I believe that you can adopt a country. You can't not be born from a place and then find your roots there. That is what happened with me in America. Yeah, Spain too. Barcelona has been great. Sole reason why I was able to survive the COVID years alone was because I was in Barcelona. When people ask me, um, how do I define myself, I have this mantra, which is I think like an American, I feel like a Latina, and I fight like a Cameroonian. That tells you all that you need to know about me in one sentence. A long sentence, but it tells you everything. So um I keep remind I've never been able to forget what Dean Grossman, the longtime dean of the Washington College of Law, where I did my law school studies, said. He was from Colombia, and he used to always say that he was speaking English and Spanish. I speak English and French. So this French element is very, very much in me. And yeah, that's one of the reasons, despite the fact that I've done most of my studies since 10th grade in English. I'm writing mostly in French, even though I'm starting to write more in English. I write for work, you know, in English, but I write literature, everything that is I consider to be my art in French. Yeah. So Africanness can be a burden, but it has to be always defined by the individual. I think that, yeah, Cameroon is not a shithole country, but it's a place where disability matters so much more that the disabled are invisible. And that fact explains not only why I left in 1993, but also why I haven't returned. And what has happened with my father shows that the struggle for African lives to matter is very, very, very much an issue today. You can't ignore it. You can't just say, I'm going to live my own life. The reason for this podcast is by telling my story, by telling more about my struggles, by what happened to my dad, is to make that point, is to illustrate the fact that if we're not able to say that African lives matter, we are always going to be defined by other people's expectations. And like I said last week in the episode about Glenn Lowry, like him, I'm tired. I'm tired to be the African disabled woman who is always angry and who has to fight for everything. That is very, very tiresome. I am tired, but I'm not giving up. So yes, Miante, third episode on of third episode of my English podcast. I hope you keep listening. Let me know what you think by writing to me. Subscribe. Thank you for listening, and see you Thursday for another episode.